The very first human experiment in Poppy Playtime's history wasn't an orphan they picked at random. Experiment 1006, the prototype, is Oliver, a boy adopted by Elliot Ludwig, Playtime Co.'s founder. Ludwig didn't just adopt him out of kindness. What he needed was a test subject to continue his work towards his real goal, bringing back his daughter who tragically passed away, Poppy. Oliver was the trial run. In a Chapter 5 cassette tape, we hear the two of them speak directly, and Oliver knows exactly what he is. He tells Ludwig,
"Ollie's gone, and I test run the prototype."
He calls Ludwig out for only caring about Poppy, saying,
"It was never about me, never about my better place. It was for her. She's all you talk about."
Ludwig tries to comfort him, offering to be a real family and even letting Oliver pick his own name. A fair trade-off, turn into a monster but you can pick your own name. That's crazy. Oliver's only question is, when can I meet her? The kid who became the most dangerous experiment in the factory started out just wanting to belong somewhere. Chapter 5's intro tape with the Wrong Side Automos commercial even briefly flashes the prototype's face over a child's, which could lead us to believe that this is Oliver and could be one of the kids that they were using for promotion. And with how much Mob Entertainment loves subtle foreshadowing and teases in Poppy Playtime, the shot here is hard to ignore. Unlike the bigger bodies that came after him, the prototype's body isn't fully engulfed as a toy. He's way more mechanical, running on Poppy gel flowing through him instead of food, as he doesn't need to eat. His hands, we've been shown since the first chapter, give away interesting facts about him too. If you look at this x-ray, the same style of joints that the prototype has as his hands, meaning he was built on some kind of endoskeleton base that they later refined and shrunk for experiments like Poppy. He was never the finished product, he was the blueprint, and somehow that blueprint became something that the inhabitants saw as a god, shaping the factory forever. Poppy wasn't created for the sake of science. She was created out of grief. Elliot Ludwig lost his daughter Poppy Ludwig in the 1960s, and he could not let her go. He'd go through hundreds of experiments trying to develop a way to bring her back, with his earliest breakthrough being on his desk in Chapter 2, Experiment 814. We find a note where a rat was fed for 2 weeks, killed, submerged in a mixture of poppy flowers and submergative gel. A week later, they hit it with an electric shock to try and revive it. It didn't work, but the note says something larger might yield greater results. Ludwig had conducted over 800 experiments before this one. That man was chasing a revival for years before he ever touched a human subject. Experiment 814 is believed to be the last animal test before Ludwig and Playtime Co. switched to people. That gel mixture became the foundation for everything, and it is exactly what Ludwig eventually used to bring back his daughter as Experiment 1007. The Poppy doll had already existed since 1950 as Playtime Co.'s best-selling toy for 34 consecutive years, but the experiment version was built from the remains of Elliot's actual daughter, Poppy Ludwig, born March 7th, 1949. Ludwig gave her the very first doll he ever made and said he saw a spark in her eye, like she'd been handed a whole new world. She spent most of her time in the factory with him, and interestingly, Ludwig's wife Molly had divorced him years before Poppy was even born, meaning Poppy herself may have been adopted too. She was the real inspiration behind the famous doll that sparked the rocket in business for Elliot's life's work. Elliot even had a room designed for her to look like a child's bedroom inside the factory, with a door that leads directly to his office. He wasn't home often, so he brought his home to her. This wasn't corporate research. This was a father who had refused to let go. What makes Poppy's story so complicated is what came about after the breakthrough of her creation along with the prototypes. She befriended Ollie without ever knowing he was the prototype. The experiment created right before her. The hour of joy was orchestrated with her knowledge, but she thought it was meant for freedom, not to be a slaughter. When she saw what really happened, she was horrified. After the massacre, Poppy actually stepped up and led the surviving toys to Safe Haven, telling them where to go and what to do, sparking a rebellion against the prototype. But the pressure broke her. She cracked, no pun intended, ran to her room crying, and the prototype found her there. He calls her a child, told her the orphans can never go free because we'll be left with nothing and Infinity will be lonely. Then carried her to her glass case and locked her inside while she screamed and begged him to stop. She stays trapped in that case for years until we showed up and freed her from it back in chapter 1. She's technically been alive for over 50 years, but as ex-mob employee Isaac pointed out, age doesn't make the experiments adults. She's one of the oldest characters in the game with the mind of a girl who never got a chance to grow up. Most experiments didn't get a choice in what happened to them. Quinn Davidson almost did, and it made everything so much worse. Quinn was an orphan in earlier experiments, and the methods weren't perfected yet. Position and turned into experiment 1354. Yarnaby fell apart, but not at the seams. It was mentally. He stopped eating. He sulked in his cell and would attack anybody who got close to him that wasn't Sawyer. Dr. Carmine Makabe called him a failure by design. Then, during or after the Hour of Joy, the two were reunited, and Yarnaby went right back to obeying Sawyer's every word. It said he even played fetch with the nightmare critters for his amusement. In chapter 4, we learn who let the dogs out, as Sawyer sends Yarnaby out at us. He smashes in the windows and stalks us through the corridors. He proceeds to chase us down through the caves until we find a conveniently timed vat of molten metal. We swing across the chain hook, and Yarnaby, with no brain, tries to keep chasing. He ends up biting the hook and catching fire from the lava pit below him, and makes one final attempt to drag himself out before slipping back in. Quinn Davidson went from being a kid smart enough to trick the adults around him, turned into an animal loyal to a man who never cared about him. Catnap's loyalty to the prototype didn't start after his transplant. It started when he was only 7 years old. Before he was Experiment 1188, his name was Theodore Granbell. Theo was just another orphan living in Home Sweet Home, who the other kids mostly ignored. Staff described him as antisocial, and he had a big imagination. He would speak a lot about having an imaginary friend who would lead him into doing very suspicious things around play care. A drawing made by Theo shows him in purple sitting on his bed with an easily recognizable skeletal hand reaching out from underneath. That friend was not imaginary. That was the prototype. Prototype had escaped containment and was hiding somewhere in the factory. He needed someone on the outside to do things for him without raising suspicion, and finding the quiet kid with no friends, the prototype hit the jackpot. He had Theodore snoop through confidential documents for him, and when counselors caught him, he told them his friend told him to do it. Joel Sinclair, the head counselor, thought it was innocent. I mean, 7-year-old snooping around through confidential documents, he probably can't even understand half the words on the papers. He was just a lonely kid with an imaginary friend doing imaginary friend things. Nobody looked into it further. Then one day, the prototype had asked him to grab a leftover grab pack with the green hand attached and use it to open a maintenance door in play care. Theodore tried, but he was 7. His frontal lobe still wasn't fully developed. During his attempt, the green hand electrocuted him and his heart stopped. With the door opened, the prototype had a clear exit. No cameras, no people. He could have walked out and nobody would have known. Instead, he carried Theodore back to the staff and gave up his own freedom to save him. On November 7th, 1990, Playtime Co. turned Theodore into Catnap, and his purpose was specific: to oversee play care, put children to sleep with the red smoke so scientists could take them for experiments. Then, 13 days later, during his adjustment period, Catnap broke out of his cell because someone forgot to lock the door and killed 6 employees while injuring 8 more. The cat got out the bag and was was not holding back. Even after becoming Catnap's bigger body, he still showed signs of remembering his life as Theodore. So they sent him to the labs for conditioning. They locked him in a room designed to reshape his identity. When he went in, he was saying, "My name is Theodore." And after 49 days, he came out saying, although if you listen closely, it sounds like he starts to say "the" as if he's about They may not have been able to erase him completely, or that was just fear of what they had done with the conditioning. Once integrated into Playcare, the kids were terrified of him at first. A giant purple cat showing up to your orphanage would do that, but within a month, most began to accept him. Some even considered him a friend. The real problem was his obsession with the prototype. Leith Pierre noted that Catnap followed him around like a lost puppy, and the prototype didn't seem to mind. Even Sawyer admitted Catnap's success rivaled even Huggies, but his connection to the prototype was a flaw they couldn't fix. During a check-in with Leith Pierre in late 1994, Catnap stayed silent the entire interaction until he broke it with 5 words. He believed it. He believed it through the Hour of Joy, where he killed every worker in Playcare and threw a grown man across the room like a football. He believed it while stalking us through Chapter 3, dispensing red smoke and watching us hallucinate. He believed it in our boss fight with him, where he moved much slower than usual because the prototype told him not to kill us. And he believed it to the very end when the prototype dropped from the ceiling with a light beaming down, almost like how Catnap thinks of him, and he reached for him. Catnap didn't run. He knelt, raised up his arms, and offered himself. The prototype accepted his offer and stabbed his fingers through his mouth and killed him instantly. Then he skinned him and draped his pelt over his back like a coat and took his stomach and red smoke for himself. Theodore gave everything to one person who ever saved him, and that person now wears him as an accessory. Let that sink in. Like, open the door, he been knocking. Braun is the only experiment who actually volunteered for this. Thomas Clark was a 59-year-old Playtime Co. employee who had worked there for 36 years as a pediatrician. When he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, he figured out if he was gonna die soon anyway, he might as well leave a final mark on his spot in the world and allow himself to be used for the sake of science and become another experiment of his own free will. But many experiments don't end well. After the transfer, Thomas was severely disoriented. His mental testing dropped by half, and he probably didn't even know where he was. It went from bad to worse, as the other experiments could tell that something was off about him. All the other experiments had been orphans, and all children. Thomas was the first staff member to go through the process. The years of being tortured by the adults in the factory had built up a lot of anger, and Thomas had to hold all of it. Boxy Boo struck first and devoured his voice box and his thyroid, and it took another 12 hours of surgery just to stabilize him again. The man traded his terminal cancer for getting his throat eaten by a jack-in-a-box. After the attack, Playtime Co. had put him in solitary confinement to keep him safe, alone in a room with nothing to do. Following the Hour of Joy, the other toys jumped him and ripped him apart. Thomas had survived his cancer after transferring into Braun. He survived Boxy Boo taking a bite of his neck and survived the additional 12 hours of the surgery table and still ended up not making it. Before she was running the game station and stretching her arms across hallways, Mommy Longlegs was just another girl named Marie Payne. She was like many, an orphan living in Playcare who suffered severe trauma and violent nightmares caused by Catnap's red smoke. Claire Harper, one of Playtime's counselors who cared, finding her with dilated pupils, quivering